Today in the garage, we're recording live at AutoTech Detroit with VicOne. VicOne is the automotive subsidiary of cybersecurity leader Trend Micro. In today's masterclass in vehicle cybersecurity, we talk about the nature of cybersecurity threats to vehicles, how SDVs can improve the landscape of cyber threats. We talk about incredibly unique programs that VicOne and Trend Micro use to help companies find zero-day threats to their products and their vehicles, and even how AI is a double-edged sword in cybersecurity. Let's go. Welcome to the garage. I'm John Heinlein, Chief Marketing Officer with Sonatus. We're recording live at AutoTech in Detroit, and our guest today is William Dalton from VicOne. Willie, welcome to the garage.
Great to be here.
We're so excited to meet you and to have you on the podcast. Start by introducing yourself. Tell us about you and your background.
Yeah, my name is William Dalton. Delighted to be here in AutoTech this week and speaking with you guys. My background is varied. I started out as an engineer, a software programmer. I did that for 7 years in the contract electronic manufacturing space. And over that time, I built up manufacturing control systems. And then I joined Trend Micro in 2004 as a database administrator.
And, almost more than 20 years ago.
Yeah, more than 20 years ago. And almost every year, or every 2 years, I've changed roles some shape or form. And started out in engineering side, got into technical management, started working on some global projects with our CEO now, Max Cheng, in VicOne. And every 2 years, change roles from technical to operational to business roles over that 20-year span. And 2.5 years ago, I had the opportunity to go work with Max on VicOne, which is a subsidiary company from Trend Micro to focus on solving problems within the automotive sector. That's
great. We'll talk more about VicOne in a second, but you have to start us off with a fun fact about you.
Sure. I'm not sure it's really fun. I think a lot of people doing these days, but I do brew my own beer, which is not probably strange for a person from Ireland. But I have my own pub and I actually upcycle. So every time there's something to be thrown out, I try to find a way to use that. And I've over the years, I've accumulated different elements to the pub. Some being a bed, some being a piece of scrap furniture, and it's a collection of it's a misfit in some ways. And I have my friends over regularly, and as a consequence, I needed to find a way to produce beer cheaper, a good conversation piece, and actually learn something along the way. So, yeah, a little bit of fun fact about me.
You were showing us pictures of that, and so it sounds, when you talk about upcycling, people can't quite visualize. But if you share us a picture, we'll put it in the episode so people can see.
Yeah, happy to do so.
It's a brilliant woodworking, beautiful space that anyone would be jealous of. I've shared this, the derivative of this fun fact earlier in the year, but I have to use it again, is that when I had a job in Oregon in the US many years ago, I learned to brew beer. And so I did some home brewing for quite a few years, and it's good fun because there's a bit of science, right?
There's a lot of science.
And it's
a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, a lot of mistakes. The good part about brewing versus distilling, which is illegal in most places, but is you can't kill yourself. It will just taste bad.
It tastes bad, yeah.
Distilling, you can kill yourself if you...
My friends are still alive.
Exactly.
But they had a couple of rough sessions.
Very good, very good. Great. So tell us about VicOne, the company's origins, and what you focus on.
So VicOne is been incorporated since May 2022, but on the back of many years of research, which Trend Micro has been doing within the automotive sector. And one of the findings, back in 2017, when they started to do this research, they realized that the cybersecurity challenges, especially with the advent of SDV, electrification, change in regulation, that the way to solve cybersecurity issues in the automotive sector is very different than the enterprise domain.
Right.
And they made a conscious decision to invest in that sector to create a separate company that operates at a different speed, has a different level of engagement with customers, and actually delivers a different product set. So we created a whole series of, true market analysis, working with different proof of concepts, proof of values with different customer profiles to actually build out a set of solutions ready for the automotive sector. And we launched that in May 2022. And over that period, we've had phenomenal growth in regards to product changes, adaptations in line with customer, because there's an element of co-design always with this.
Sure.
Whether that's embedded in the vehicle or whether that's offboard, or whether that's integrating with their process or operation practice or with their regulatory demands or requirements. So there's a very bespoke approach in general. And on the back of bringing those products to market, we've had a huge number of partnerships. Everything, from the SDV space to onboard to offboard systems, but also solution providers in regards to providing a wide array of capabilities depending on the needs of the customers. So it's been a fun ride and high velocity,
right,
and very interesting journey so far, understanding customer problems and solving them.
That's great. So, we talk about SDV and vehicle software on this podcast a lot. And when I talk to customers, when I talk to industry folks, there's sometimes a hesitancy in some sense to shift to SDV, feeling like that the increased software is going to cause a greater attack surface. And I think that's true. What's your perspective on the shift to SDV and cybersecurity?
It's something that's going to happen regardless. We've seen it in the enterprise space. We've seen software-defined networking, software-defined WAN, software-defined data center, software-defined storage. Everything is becoming software-defined. Software is eating everything up. And the reason that is obviously that brings a huge amount of efficiencies in regards to software delivery cycles, software delivery mechanisms, the frequency and the iterations that you can update your products and keep them safe, or add more functionality at a cost profile that makes sense. So it's very ephemeral in use case, right? So depending on what you need at the time, you use the resources that you require to sustain or to satisfy those requirements. So it's a lot more cost effective in a lot of ways. So it's going to happen. And what you see now, the demands in the electrical vehicle, it requires regular software updates, for a change in, and actually this change in architecture allows the ability to actually, once the car is post-production, to actually bring new changes into the vehicle. And that requires a fundamental shift from the traditional way of delivering software, or where there's a lot of software hardware coupling. In this case, you're abstracting a lot of software where actually it's working independently, and then you have an abstraction layer to the hardware. So the advantages that provides not only to automakers but consumers is huge, and this is what they'll demand. So it's going to be consumer driven.
That's a really interesting point you make about the ability to update, because a number of the most famous vehicle hacks, the Jeep Cherokee hack, and people know about many of these, those are not software-defined vehicles. Those are conventional vehicles. So you say, oh God, if I do a software-defined vehicle, it'll be hackable. Well, conventional vehicles are hackable, but it's a hell of a lot harder to fix a non-software-defined vehicle. With a software-defined vehicle, you can make improvements, you can make patches, you can respond to those threats much more quickly. So I think that's a misperception from some people that SDVs, while there is potentially an increased attack surface, there's also an increased ability to respond to attacks more quickly. And that's one of the things your company does.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, we've successfully demonstrated with a partner of ours at CES where they actually were able to remotely update flash the car and actually up and mitigate a risk. So, this is real. And I guess back to your point, the traditional vehicles, the attacks that we see, they're the same type of attacks that we see in the enterprise space. It's the same type of vulnerabilities. It's the same type of issues that we see. So they're still at chip level. They're at software level. They're not patch systems, access management not managed correctly. So it's the same type of issues that we're seeing in the enterprise space, actually in the vehicle space as well. And that's no different whether they're software-defined or traditional. Okay.
So now when you deploy your solutions, are these deployed in the cloud, in the vehicle, combination? Tell us about that.
So they're across the board. So we do onboard and offboard. And we think this is really necessary because if you're just doing offboard, it means the point where the car is disconnected from the cloud, which will happen in an attack because that will be one of the steps that they will take. You've lost control. And by having the solutions embedded in the vehicle, you can actually maintain some level of control to mitigate against those attacks. So we would have our IDS solution, we call it X-Carbon. It's integrated.
IDS is intrusion detection system.
Intrusion detection. IDPS, actually.
Great.
Intrusion detection and prevention mechanisms.
Great.
So we've technology which we've brought from Trend, and one of the points I mentioned earlier when we came from Trend is that we three distinct elements which we brought: IP, talent and strategic financial independence. And some of that IP is IPDS technology, which has been running in the enterprise data centers for many years. And this is wireframe, inline protection, deep packet inspection of every packet, inspecting every packet in out of the data center for the largest multinationals and even automakers in the industry. I think we've top 8 of the top 10 automakers using our IPDS technology in the data center. And this technology has been running for many years, and we've adapted some of that into the vehicles. So if we want to, at the network layer or the CAN layer, or you want to look at the host level, you can actually look at all the different types of attacks in the vehicle. So if you look at anomalous behavior, if you're looking at different signals that are happening in the vehicle, to identify the different TTPs, or the tools, techniques, or practices that are being applied by the threat actors, you can actually mitigate and shut them down in the vehicle. So sometimes decisions in the vehicle make sense, but sometimes decisions off-board make sense. So if you want to look at a macro situation around attacks against multiple vehicles, you can't do that with inside the vehicle.
Right.
So you need a combination of these two, and we have, as I said, we have our intrusion detection mechanism that it's in the vehicle to report on those, to send them off board, or we have our IDPS where it actually can make those decisions in the vehicle as well. And we have the capability to apply rule sets or patches to the vehicle where you don't need to go through that whole software testing and validation process. You can actually mitigate it before you actually, if you want to, we call it like a Band-Aid solution. So you put the Band-Aid in place to give you enough time to actually go through the test and verification process.
Right, interim mitigation solution.
Exactly. And the off-board side then, if you need to look at macro level decisions, then that would be typically done in our vehicle SOC, XNexus, which takes telemetry from the vehicle. It can take all the different signals. But typically what we do is we only send information that's necessary. So one of the challenges that with OEMs right now is that they're fighting this battle of sending all this information off board, which costs a lot of money because they need to basically send everything and then use AI modeling in the off-board system then to try to figure out the noise. What we do is we do that on board.
Right.
And actually we only send what's relevant and off board. So that cuts down on cost, cuts down on operation time for the analyst that's actually dealing with those. And when we augment that then with our threat capabilities, we have a huge heritage in the threat landscape, and we actually build that into our solutions as well. So we then overlay the threat information. So basically something that we see happening in the wild. Some threat actors are doing something nefarious. We then augment that against the vehicle data plus feeds from vulnerability management. So when we look at the supply chain assets or the vehicle architecture, we then cross-correlate the threat against the asset, against the information that we see in the vehicle, and it gives us a full view of what's happening across the board. And then we can put the right mechanisms in place then to protect against those situations. And we provide that information then to the VSOC analyst, and then they package that up then to hand off then into the PCR team then that will basically mitigate that and actually put a long-term fix. And that's basically how we do.
Just for the benefit, or I guess VSOC is Vehicle Security Operations Center, usually operated by the OEM.
Yeah.
Someone who's monitoring the threats from their...
Yeah, it can be a vehicle SOC, or you can call it a product SOC.
Mm-hmm.
So depending which side of the organization, if it's more on the IT side, it's more typically called VSOC. If it's on the product security side, it's like a product security operations center. Or you can also call it like a cross detection response system,
right,
which basically takes different feeds from different systems and then integrate them with the operation practice within the OEM.
That's fantastic. This is becoming a masterclass in cybersecurity. Wonderful.
It doesn't stop there. We also have solutions for EVSE protection. So for the vehicle charging, we know that's another attack path. So whether it's over the air, whether it's through the vehicle charging side, whether it's through the cloud backend, whether it's through the API layer, whether it's through the IVI system, whether it's on the vehicle itself, the attack surface is exploded. And then you're introducing a lot of new technologies as well, right? So we talk about SDV and the abstraction that's happening, where you see a consolidated architecture onto the domain controllers or the zonal controllers, and then you see abstraction of workload and segregation of workload.
Right.
So you get the introduction of hypervisors, container security, and these all bring additional challenges as well. And that's why I talk about the traditional challenges around security into the vehicle now. And that's where you get this perfect storm. Traditional, like hardware, software embedded, together with the SDV and the technology that's required to make that happen, and it's an opportunity that's ripe for somebody to take advantage of.
So you talked about sometimes your solutions run in the cloud, sometimes you run in the vehicle. Speaking to in the vehicle now for a moment, what sorts of resources where do you run in the vehicle? What sorts of resources do you use?
So we would go through a design discussion with whether it's an OEM or tier one in regards to what's the best place to do it. So it depends really on the architecture. The architecture are all varied. Typically you would see something at the TCU, you'd see something maybe at the ADS system, maybe in the IVI side. So we would then, work with the vendor to figure out what is the most optimal way to do that. That typically takes, and we have a lot of partnerships already developed with some of the major chip manufacturers to pre-integrate. So to give an example, in XP, we've integrated with their Goldbox solution, and basically that can speed up the time to market for tier ones and OEMs to deploy and utilize some of the hardware acceleration features sometimes, or actually cut down on the integration work. Typically, this is a very quick process for us. We turn around, even in, let's say it's a new architecture or a new chip manufacturer that we want to, or SOC, we can turn this around in 2 to 3 weeks. It's really a great process. And then obviously the integration process takes a little bit longer when you work with them, but the validation of that is really, really quick. And so yeah, that's how we work with OEMs and embedded. And then I missed some.
The question is resources. I think
resources. Okay. We have a very low footprint, and this is one of our unique differentiation points against some of the other players in this space. We really only use the minimum set of resources to run that workload, and that can then run at the application layer. But it also can integrate with some of the hardware capabilities of the chip. So again, I use NXP as an example. Let's say they have a NPU, which they do, and if you want to do things like, for example, packet inspection, and you want to do that at wire speed, then there's ability to utilize maybe some of the memory space within there to actually do that at fast speed, where some you might offset. So we have the ability to utilize some of the hardware capabilities for specific requirements. But as I said, this is all down to each individual use case and actually their security requirements from their cybersecurity team.
That's an important point, and Sonatus does this as well. We have, for example, a partnership with NXP, and we're in production with them, and we're using specific capabilities like packet acceleration, packet forwarding acceleration, and so using the resources of whatever chip vendor, whatever ECU you're on is really smart. So we were talking yesterday, and you have this incredible program between yourselves and Trend Micro to help companies identify zero-day threats in their products. Tell us about this program. It's a really incredible
It's
story.
It's called Pwn2Own, and we've been the first dedicated Pwn2Own for automotive since last 2 years, and we run that successfully now for the last 2 years in Japan, in Tokyo, every January, and it's really successful for automotive. But I'll give you a little bit of history on Pwn2Own itself. So basically, it's a bug bounty program that incentivizes the best ethical hackers in the world to compete.
White hat
hackers. Yeah. The good guys.
Yeah.
And basically to compete to identify zero-day vulnerabilities.
Maybe for our guests, you could explain what a zero-day threat is.
A zero-day vulnerability is a vulnerability that there's the zero represents the time to patch, which is you need to do it right now, because these have never been seen before. So these are novel threats, novel weaknesses, that vulnerabilities that haven't been identified before, and either by the vendor, by the public at large. And as long as that time from zero exists, they're exploitable. And it's in everyone's interest to reduce that time as much as possible and patch and mitigate the risk as much as possible. So that's the term zero day. So we're for the Pwn2Own event. So the ZDI group, Zero Day Initiative, they do a bug bounty program where they purchase exploits in general. But the Pwn2Own event is about identifying zero-day exploits. And we've been running this successfully since 2007, I think. So it's over many, many years in Trend Micro, and then more recently with VicOne for Pwn2Own Automotive. And as I said, it's really the best of the best. To give an example, last year we had 49 zero days identified in 3 days. So when you think about comparing that against the general industry, there was 38 zero days identified across the entire automotive sector in the entire year. In just 3 days, with highly motivated, highly skilled, highly incentivized individuals in a control environment that can actually identify that many vulnerabilities, you can infer from that a couple of things. Number one, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit out there in regards to, and actually we've seen that from the results, very traditional type risks that we see and exploits that have been used. The second one is that it's kind of a wake-up call, is that when eventually what will happen is two things will happen at the same time and will be a dramatic change for the industry. Number one is that the technical barrier of entry for bad actors to take advantage of will become lower. And we already kind of see that in some ways. But probably the one that's more compelling is once they figure out a monetization opportunity, then that's where it'll really change the game. All right. So one of the, again, just to kind of bring the story back a little bit for Pwn2Own, the purpose of Pwn2Own is one, we partner with the vendor. So a vendor will, like Tesla was the anchor sponsor for the last 5 years for Pwn2Own Automotive. They provide a whole vehicle to the hackers to actually try and target. By the way, they get to keep it if they're successful.
Yeah, tell us about that story. That's really interesting.
Yeah, because first of all, the aftermarket value of a hacked car is not much, right? So it probably makes sense to give them the vehicle, but it's a good incentive for them to do it. But also we have EVSC suppliers that will send their components for attack. But most of the solutions are available in public domain. They try to hack it, and what you find is that a lot of these, they're competing with each other, right? So some of them even they're trying up to the last minute. They're trying to identify weaknesses, and they're hoping the vendor doesn't patch it the week before, so that when they run direct. So what they do is they turn up at the event. They get a lottery system to figure out who goes first. They run their script to demonstrate how the attack is working. It's validated by us, by the vendor, and if it's successful, they get prize money, and they get points. And the winner then is called a master of Pwn2Own. So it's really, really highly contested. We give away anything from 800,000 to about 1.5 million, depending on.
This is real legitimate prize money.
Yes, it's really. These are the best of the best. These are people who identify vulnerabilities that no other people can identify. Really, really high skilled individuals. And sometimes they're groups, sometimes they're individuals. So we have a lot of very famous groups that compete. It's like a circuit, but Pwn2Own is the holy grail of the circuit. Now, what we do is once we identify the vulnerability, the reason is why do we do this, right? So the bounty is actually paid out then by the vendor and by us. So we split that, and then we take ownership of the IP. So we then understand the TTPs that have been used, how the exploit has been, what are the different elements of it that we bring that into our products and protect our customers. And then we work with the vendor to do the disclosure process. And the purpose of that is responsible disclosure. And we've been doing that successfully in the enterprise domain for many, many years, which is a well-known practice, adopted by everybody.
Right.
And it's typically a 90-day notification. The challenge in the automotive sector is there's a very different safety aspect to the disclosure. So, and also there's a very complicated mechanism to disclosure. So the safety aspect, I think we all understand. There's if a bad actor can take advantage of a vehicle that has safety and life, implications. The complexity side is, there's so many different tiers in the delivery mechanism for OEMs. Ultimately, the OEM is responsible, but there's a tier 1 supplier, a tier 2 supplier. There's a long life cycle. Some of these vehicles on the road for up to 20, 25 years, depending in some cases. And the engineering teams that built this hardware, software component still working? Are they still working together? Where's the source code? Have they got the capacity to release a patch? What does that mean from an operational perspective in regards to cost? How quickly can they do that and prioritize with their existing commitments? What is the implication and indemnity? So there's all of these operational challenges, risks, legal risks, insurance risks that they need to consider. So it's not a simple situation to solve. So we need to work very closely with the OEMs and the suppliers to actually identify a mechanism for them to actually mitigate that risk and then disclose that publicly.
You were sharing with us some stories from other industries from your Trend Micro, because you've been at Trend Micro for a long time until recently moving to VicOne. Some really horror stories about how cybersecurity threats can impact other types of businesses. Do you want to share some of those stories?
Yeah, so one of the, maybe before I go into the stories, I think one of the things to think about, specifically in automotive, is disclosure, deterministic disclosure. So when I talk about the challenges around coordinated or disclosure, it's deterministic in some ways, because we know OEMs and tier ones have to do pen testing, and they have their own bug bounty programs. They might have their own ways and means of identifying risks in the in the architecture and the software and in the components themselves, but it's on their schedule in regards to when they do the disclosure, right? And I talked about the two inflection points when there's a lower technical barrier of entry and a high monetization. So once that happens, and it will happen, I think at some point, it no longer becomes deterministic. Now you need to react and to make decisions very, very quickly in a really complex situation that's already difficult to do in today's world, and then to do that with time pressure and public scrutiny on top of you, right? So that changed the landscape. And back to your question, I've had first-hand experience of many people, even in Ireland, which is a small country, but I've a lot of friends who are CISOs that we know in so many different situations, people and companies get hacked all the time. It's most of it is not publicly disclosed. I can recall 3 specific conversations where a friend of mine who's a CISO made a phone call to me and said, "I'm in trouble." There was one example where the person was literally on board in a couple of weeks, and all their operations are down globally. Another example where medical institutions were affected. So, and when that happens, that will either make or break you as a CISO.
Sure.
It's something that you'll never forget. You need to make so many high quality decisions under extreme pressure in a very short space of time. And a lot of times, no matter how much work you do, no matter how many tabletop exercises you run, no matter how many dry runs you prepare for, you can't really prepare for this type of event. And the stress that the personal stress that they're under to deal with this, you have public obligations. If it's a public organization, you have you're dealing with third parties coming in that are offering to, maybe the board is recommending someone to come in and try to figure out what happened to get answers. You've everybody wanting updates regularly. You have your team who are going to be stressed and burnt out to try and figure this out. It's a nightmare, and I've had first-hand experience of that. So this is not something you want to do very often. I'm pretty sure every CISO goes through at least once in their lifetime, but it's not a pretty place to be.
So that tends to make people reticent. Oh gosh, we shouldn't put software in vehicles, and we shouldn't do this. But the reality is, we have techniques. There are best practices in enterprise IT to solve these problems. The technology is getting better. Trend Micro is continuing to stay ahead of that. So, as we think to the automotive space, what's your recommendation to the industry really for how we should be bringing those practices into automotive?
Yeah, so the demands are this is going to happen regardless. The question is around how do we, should we do this from a security point of view? We should, because the benefits, the economical benefits, the commercial benefits, the time to market benefits, the operational benefits, they outweigh the risk. The question is, how do you manage the risk? And we've seen this successfully managed as we've seen software-defined everything come into the enterprise space. There are ways to mitigate those and stay ahead of those. So the more you do in regards to proactive security, the more investment that you make in regards to understanding the type of scenarios that may happen, building in security by design, building in very strong operational mechanisms to be able to handle an event, but also to throughout the life cycle of the attack, what is your mitigation throughout that whole life cycle, and making sure that you're covered in all those areas. Software-defined vehicle is no different. It's just another way to make sure that you're protected. So my advice is not to change any strategy in regards to adoption of it. Just make sure that you protect it correctly.
Right. Well, such an important conversation these days is artificial intelligence. It's becoming pervasive in many different parts of the world, of course, but in vehicles as well. Tell me about the pros and cons of AI in vehicles with respect to cybersecurity.
So I'm going to tie this back to the Pwn2Own event, right? And recently we had Sina, who's the master of Pwn2Own this year. He's an individual, and he's competing against teams like Synactive and lots of other groups that have multiple individuals, really high-skilled, high-caliber individuals that are trying to identify vulnerabilities. And I asked him the question, around AI, and he claimed to be not an AI expert, but his answer was, I develop AI models that help me to offload the repetitive work or the type of work I just don't have time to do, but I need to get done to help me to actually figure out all these attack situations. And
so you say he's a white hat hacker using AI to increase his productivity in white hat hacking.
Exactly, and that's how he can compete against groups. And so my inflection from that was, this is a guy who's doing ethical hacking. What if he's a bad actor? Then they can also take advantage of AI to help them to even be more successful in their attempts as well. So that's on one side, right? But then we also see the capability of using AI for protection, in regards to using various models to identify patterns of behavior, in regards to anomaly models. You can see in regards to filtration, in regards to different events we see from the vehicles. We can see that in regards to correlation, in regards to different patterns of behavior that we see. We talked about onboard or offboard, but also from different systems. You might want to see different activities across those, not just look at them as isolation pools, but actually look across the whole piece. So all these different things you can use AI to speed it up where a human just cannot do it. Reading logs from the vehicle itself. You're going to need different ways to traditionally move on from just rule sets. And so you need AI. We can see people are going to use AI to attack, but also you can use AI to defend. And the question is, who's going to win the race, and who can quickly adapt the best?
That's such an interesting perspective of the double-edged sword of AI for cybersecurity. Willie, this has been an incredible conversation. We've covered such a wide range. I've learned a ton. Thank you for visiting with us, and we're excited to work with you. We look forward to working with you more in the future from Sonatus, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
If you like what you're seeing with today's episode, please like and subscribe to see more episodes like this, and you can find us on YouTube, on the Sonatus website, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. We look forward to seeing you again in another episode of The Garage very soon.